And tonight on PM Express, a conversation about inflation rates approaching 40% as the year-on-year inflation rate for September hits 37.2%, the highest in more than a decade. This is coming on the back of the cedi to dollar exchange rate hitting the 11 cedis threshold. The result is more trouble for businesses with its telling effect on consumers. What is accounting for this rise? We'll figure out shortly. But let me break it down for you just by way of helping you to understand what a 37.2% inflation on your groceries or basic needs like bread means. It will also help you to appreciate the role that utility tariff increase in petroleum prices, transportation costs and port road infrastructure plays in bringing the inflation to almost 40%. So this is what the Ghana Statistical Service is saying, that inflation is 37.2%. That's for September generally. Now, this is the breakdown of the 37.2. You have food inflation and non-food inflation. Look at this. Food inflation, 37.8%. Food inflation alone is even higher than the general inflation for September. Non-food inflation is 36.8%. Now, look at how it has panned out since the beginning of the year. In January, it was at 13.9%. February, 15.7%. In March, 19.4%. Then you come to April, 23.6%. May, 27.6%. And then you see that it's been climbing up. The speed with which it's climbing. So look at 29.8% and look at 31.7% in July, 33.9% in August, and 37.2% in September. Mind you, we've always projected for a single digit inflation rate. What we want is actually 8 plus or minus 2, but that hasn't been achieved in a long while. Now look at it in percentage wise, food versus non-food inflation trend. And from January to September, where we are right now, you can see that it's been climbing. So this is the food inflation, which is the green line, and then you see the non-food inflation, which is 36.8, and you can just see the fluctuation. In January, you realize that it dropped in February, then it went just up until May. So at here, the line was supposed to be straight, but you can see that it's curving again. So that is your food and non-food inflation rate there. Now, this is what it all means. Inflation for imported items is now at 40.7%. Inflation for domestic items, 35.8%. And you can understand why 40.7% for imported items. Dollar to cedi exchange rate has also come in here. And this is going to be the heart of our conversation. We're going to be focusing on how this whole inflation is going to be affecting the cost of business, cost of production, and overall cost of consuming food. So it means that the industry players will have all this cost incurred, but at the end of the day, it will be translated to you and I, who are the consumers. How are we going to handle this? So this is the breakdown and the regional breakdown, and you can see Upper West, Upper East, Northeast, Northern Savannah, Bono East, and Central down there, Greater Accra there. Eastern probably has the highest, which is 47.1%, and followed by Greater Accra, which is 45.3%. Overall inflation, you have the green, which is Upper West, and then you have 30%, 35%, 40%, and 45%, which is representing the Greater Accra region. Now look at the breakdown for September for the kind of items that you will need as a consumer, and the increase that you would have to pay in the time being in terms of inflation. You talk about water. You cannot do anything without water. And what the increase that you've had on water is 58.9%. Come and talk about milk, dairy products, and eggs. And I mean, in every household, breakfast has all of these on that dining table. It has 49.0% increase. Sugar, confectionery, and desserts, 48.0%. Cereals and cereal products, you have 46.0%. Fruit and vegetable juice, 45.2%. And of course, fish and other seafood, that also is an accompaniment to our meals. You have 44.5%. Fruits and nuts, 44.4%. Subclass, year-on-year food inflation, tea and other plant products for infusion, you have 40.0%. Oil and fats, 39.3%. Live animals, meat and other parts, definitely you can't also do without this, 38.8%. And it goes on like that. Soft drink, coffee, cocoa drinks, all of that, you have the increase there. Now look at this. We're talking about the inflation and policy working, and people are asking whether we've actually had our modeling right. Because if you look at the inflation rate, you will realize that right now, inflation rate is higher than interest rate. What would the investor do? If you were an investor, would you continue to buy treasury bills because your return will not give you the amount that you're looking for? That could also be explaining why a lot of people are focusing on buying more dollars, and that's why we're seeing a short in demand going higher and supply low. So this is the line. And then so you can see that from September last year up to September now, we had 10.6 inflation, and then policy rate was at 13.5. October 11, policy 13.5. And in November 12.2, you had policy rate 14.5. In December 12.6, policy 14, that was okay. 13.9 in January 2022, 14.5 policy rate. Now look at how it's turning. So in February 2022, you have inflation at 15.7 and you have policy rate at 14.5. Then in March, you have 19.5%. Look at this carefully. 19.4% for inflation, and then now you have 17 policy rate. Now you come to April, 23.6 inflation, and look at policy rate. Now come to May, and then you realize that it's gone up. Inflation 27.6, and then you have policy rate 19, and from May upwards, look, the line was supposed to be straight, and then now it is curving. So this is where the problem is. It's been stagnant. And so the question then is the policy rate working? Did we get the modeling right? Once again, it's something that we'll be looking at. So tonight, we're looking at the impact of this whole inflation on the consumer, because the industry players finally will narrow the cost down to the consumer, you and I, who will be using the products. Tonight, I've been joined by Dr. Patrick Esuming. He's a development economist at the University of Ghana Business School. John Foster Ajao is also a principal statistician at the Ghana Statistical Service. Would also be joining this conversation. Anotre Beidu, he'll be joining me in the studio. He's former director of operations, Isoko and Agric analyst. And Mark Bedu Abuaje, who is CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, also will be joining me in the studio. Let's have a conversation after this break. Welcome back to PM Express. My name is Ayisha Ibrahim, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me. Nana is here in the studio with me. Dr. Esuming. Dr. Esuming is here, is joining us on Zoom, and the others are also joining us via Zoom. I'm grateful, gentlemen, for your time. Let me start with the drivers actually that usually impact on such increases? You can talk about utility tariff increase. I mean, just recently we witnessed from PURC, ECG and the Ghana Water Company increase their tariffs. You can talk about petroleum price increase. Even though prices on the world market are dropping, we are not seeing that here in Ghana. John Ajao, thank you so much for your time. These and many more I know are the components of the skyrocketing inflation rate we are seeing for September. To what extent did these factors impact the 37.2%?
Thank you, and good evening to you and
Yes, Mr. Ajao, go ahead.
we did explain some key factors. Even though we had increases in water, electricity,
Okay, so go ahead, go ahead.
So even though you have increased water as one variable, you realize that I share what
Some terrible connection there. Let's try and fix. Mr. Ajao, are you back?
Yes, am I back?
Okay, go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead. Okay, so that there's a problem with connection there. Let's try and fix it, and then we'll go back to Ajao for him to actually explain the impact of all the drivers that we've mentioned. Mr. Ajao, if you are back, you were trying to explain to us how we got to the 37.2%. All right, so we'll try and get him to join us because it's very, very important that he puts that in perspective for us to understand. Now, okay, one more time. Mr. Ajao, are you back? If you're back, we want to know what impacted the 37.2%. We're still not getting him. We'll get him back. But let me bring you in, Mark Bedu Abuaje, who is CEO of Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much for coming. Definitely, this will affect businesses. Already, there's the issue about exchange rate, dollar and CD exchange rate, which today is at 11 CD 50 pesos. Already, businesses are crying. Now, to top it up with inflation, I know that definitely it will be transferred onto the consumer at the end of the day. Yeah. But I need you to explain to us the extent of or how this will impact on your business at every stage.
Yes. I think the first thing is to look at how did we get here? At the beginning of the year, inflation was, I think, 13.9. Now it's 37.2. For me, we cannot blame the private sector and businesses. It is the actions and inactions of government that have brought us to this level. Mm-hmm. Now, you have an economy where within 9 months, you've had a currency depreciating by 40%. Economy that we have consistently been increasing utility rates. Economy that the policy rate from the beginning of the year has increased by 10%. Then you realize that you are creating an environment that will not be conducive for businesses. And businesses need all these things put together to produce before they price. So if you put them together and all this inflation and other things are going up, at the end of it, it becomes a component in their pricing level. For a typical business, when there is an increase in inflation, 3 things or 4 will happen. The first is the cost of production. The second is the impact on their revenue. And the third is whatever investment they might have made outside the real sector. Now, when inflation goes up, it means on average, prices of goods and services have gone up. And these are the items that businesses use. So if you have electricity going up, water going up, even food, they are raw materials. Definitely when they go to the market and they buy and they add value to it, the cost of production definitely will go up. So at the end of it, they factor all these things and say that this is my cost of production A. I'm adding a margin of B to it. So the price will be A plus B. That goes to the market.
Okay.
As to whether people will be able to buy or not is a different thing. Now, so let's look at the revenue aspect of it. Who will buy the product? Is the consumer.
Yeah.
And an increase in inflation means that your purchasing power has been eroded. If you have 1,000 cedis in September last year, and were able to buy a certain amount of goods and services,
Okay.
with inflation of 37.2 in September, you'll be able to buy the same amount of service, less that margin. So your purchasing power has gone up.
Yeah.
If you want to buy the same basket of goods and services, then you need 137% to buy the same thing.
Yeah.
So people, rational consumers, will adjust. Things that they don't need immediately, they put them aside and then concentrate on the necessities. So your goods that you are producing, people are not buying because they don't have money. And anytime there's an increase in inflation, there is not an immediate increase in the salaries or wages of consumers.
Yeah.
So definitely their purchasing power will go down. They are not buying. So as a business person, your revenue will go down. So you are suffering from the cost of production and also suffering from a shortfall in revenue. When you put all this together, only few businesses can survive under these circumstances. Either you reduce the scale of production or you collapse, you go down. And we are in an economy where about 97% of businesses are SMEs. And these factors are not good for them.
Yeah.
Gradually, we are killing businesses. We are saying that the private sector is the engine of growth. What oil are you putting into the engine? Is it dirty oil? And when you put dirty oil in that engine, the engine will one day break down. That is what we are doing. We need to be very careful the way we are treating the private sector, because the private sector is the one employing people. Government employ only few.
Yeah.
But the majority of employable people within Ghana, about 94%, is being employed by the private sector. Who pays the tax? It's when businesses are making profit that they pay tax. If they are making losses, they can't pay tax. So I think that the effect is obvious for all of us to see. For a business person, when there is an increase, you cannot transfer the whole increase in the cost of production to the consumer. It depends on a number of factors. Now, economy will say elasticity of demand for the product.
Yeah.
And also you look at the people that are buying your product. You want to keep a certain market. So you cannot transfer 100% of the cost of production to consumers. A part of it you have to absorb. So definitely your profit will reduce, if not a loss. You will not be able to pay taxes. So I think that we have to, as a country, quickly do something about the way the economy is going. It's not good. And I think that businesses are suffering. They are really suffering. It's real. I was just having a discussion with one of our members, and just yesterday and today, he was supposed to bring a product from South Africa. Just within this period, he has lost 50,000 Ghanaians just because of the exchange.
Wow.
Where is he going to get the money? So if he's able to bring the product, he will add up the price to it. What are we doing to ourselves?
The consumer is the one at a loss now. Thankfully, Nana Bedu, who is the former director of operations at Isoko, is also on Zoom with us. You offer online marketing. You monitor pricing. What signals are you picking with this 37.2%?
Well, thank you. Like you mentioned, unfortunately, I'm no longer at my post at Isoko, but like the CPI rates have indicated, definitely the food price inflation figures at this point of the year are a lot higher than typically they would be, because this is the post-harvest period, and so there's supposed to be an abundance of food, and thus food prices typically should have gone down. But unfortunately, they are not, as we may have predicted, or as Isoko may have predicted sometime earlier in the year. And so this points to the fact that the added component of the pricing of food has become a lot larger than it typically is. So what I mean is the cost of production is the main component of the pricing of food, but other things such as transportation and of course the margin of the farmer, because he is also a consumer, and in these terms you consider him as a business unit. So his standard of living, he has to buy other stuff, he has to pay school fees and things like that. So all of those components are typically priced into how much they sell their food for. Now, the food prices not coming down indicates that those components are larger than they should be, like I've said. And so this points to a fundamental problem with the structure of the economy itself. I think one of the key points in our history where we've had inflation like this was perhaps in the period after the droughts of 1983, following that hyperinflation that the country experienced.
About 40%.
Right? Yes, about 39% in 1985, thereabouts.
Yep.
Yes. And the problem is that at that time, the economy was largely based on agric. So it would make sense that such a hit to the agricultural sector would affect the whole country. That makes sense. But in current terms, where agriculture is accounting for about 17 to 20% of GDP, for food prices to be this high at this point in the year, it means that there's a lot of things that are not going right. And I think our panelists will speak a lot more about some of these macro effects. But one key thing which was mentioned by a colleague from the Ghana Chamber of Commerce is, of course, the exchange rate. And when it comes to food, we should not look at just the dollar, because the dollar does affect imports of food commodities such as rice, processed oils, etc., that we consume. And so definitely those prices will be a lot higher.
Yeah.
But even if you look sub-regional, right, a lot of onions, tomatoes, even meat that we consume in Ghana is imported from the sub-region, so the likes of Niger, Burkina Faso, etc. And even there, our currency is not competing favorably. So in January, if you had 1 cedi, you would have 93 or 94 CFA.
Okay.
But currently, 1 cedi only gives you 64 cedis, right? So even if the importer was importing the same quantity of meat, we would need a lot more cedis to do that importation. And of course, definitely that gets passed on to the consumer.
Yeah.
Of course, in addition to what the farmer, or in this case the butcher or the onion seller or whatever it is, would also have to pay for other goods and services, his margin, right? So all of these factors are adding to food prices not being able to go up. And food being the most fundamental of necessities, if food prices are high, it means that everybody's real income is in trouble. Because like my colleague said, when prices of goods and services go up, we start cutting on luxuries. But here's the case where the surge in pricing is being led by necessities such as rent, such as social protection, and food. And so this greatly erodes the purchasing power of especially the most vulnerable, who can only afford these kinds of things. So it's a very unprecedented time in our economic history, as it were.
Dr. Sumin, I was talking about the fact that the 37.2% is actually higher than interest rates. And that's the reason why those who want to buy treasury bills may not get the kind of return that they're looking for. And so they may turn their attention to actually buying dollars, which they see as safe investment. I mean, did we get our modeling right?
Good evening, and good evening to viewers and also my fellow panelists. Yeah, I think, the The inflation that we are currently seeing is extremely broad-based and is really becoming entrenched. So it's a configuration of factors. But I think if whichever way you dissect it, I think wherever it started, it's really pervaded through all the sectors of the economy. So we need to understand that it is a consequence of several things. So we've had the currency depreciating, as been mentioned, but we've also had real challenges with our own domestic food production, and then we've also had challenges with underlying cost drivers. So I think we see that the policymakers have tried to, especially the central bank has tried some measures to try and resolve some of the challenges, but I think it's clear that the measures that are being put in place are not what we really need to fundamentally resolve the inflation. I think the monetary policy increases can only do so much, because at the moment you can clearly see that the underlying cost drivers, fuel prices, currency depreciation, and transport cost of producing itself. So we know the cost of doing business in this country has been rising. So it's really become very broad-based, and I think that's why the persistent increases in the monetary policy rate hasn't really made a significant dent.
Do we have John back on the line? Yes, John, can you hear me? John Ajaho, if you're there, earlier you were trying to explain to me what really went into this 37.2%. But one other interesting thing you want to touch on is the regional breakdown. How some regions had higher inflations than others. You want to explain that to us?
Thank you. I presume I can be heard now.
Yes, go ahead.
So we're saying that the inflation we're witnessing now is coming from multiple sources, domestic and external. So the domestic, we are all aware that just from the first week of September, and these have pass-through effects. And so, for example, if somebody operates, let's say, a cold store, and then electricity bill has been increased, it will definitely have effect on the price of meat. And now, as I can explain, the global dynamics, the forex sector, imported items that have high prices outside. So all these come to play, and we are getting these 7.2%. Now, for the regional dynamics, it depends on the basket of the region. So as somebody rightly said, we are in the post-harvest season. And so if those regions have enough of the farm produce, and if the transport fare is not affecting them that much, then obviously they will record a lower food inflation. On the contrary, if it comes to areas like Greater Accra, where we do much of the imported items, non-food items, these ones are affected by the forest market, by imported inflation and stuff like that.
Okay, Ms. Abwaje, so definitely you cannot your businesses cannot come to a halt because there's higher inflation, because there's depreciation in the city. Definitely life must go on. How do you intend to cope with all these situations playing and staring at you?
Yeah, well, I think from the beginning of the year, we were well aware of the challenges that we're going to face ahead of us up to the end of the year. So a lot of businesses, what they have done is to put in place a survival strategies. It's not a time for you to expect huge profit. It's not a time for you to expand. It's not a time for a CEO to buy a new car. It's a time for you to ensure that at least you have your business running until a certain point where we feel that the economy is okay. So that is basically what businesses are doing. So for them to survive, one of the key ways is for you to at least pass on certain level of the cost you are incurring to the consumer, if you may not be able to pass it all. That is why the second phase of inflation will be coming on. For me, I don't think that in the next month, we are going to have inflation reducing. Definitely, we are going to have inflation going up. Probably the rate of growth of the inflation will slow down, but it's not going to reduce. So we have factored in all these things in our pricing models, even though it's difficult. We are hopeful that the policies that we've heard and seen that they are implementing will be fruitful, and it will create an environment that is conducive for us. In terms of the exchange rate, we heard of the Afrexim Bank 750, which came in. We're hoping that it will do something, but the demand for dollar is high. The demand for dollar now is about 4 times the supply. So definitely prices will go up. I don't think it was able to have any meaningful impact in the exchange rate market. The cocoa syndicated loan is also coming in about 1.2 billion. It may not be able to fill the gap, but at least it will bring some level of stability.
We're hoping so.
Yeah, we are hoping so. And if by God's grace we get the IMF facility, then we'll be able to have some stability. For businesses, what negatively impacts on activities is uncertainty. If you are not able to predict what is ahead of you, and you can't do that if you have what we are having around us. If you have inflation increasing at this level, you can't predict what will happen. If you have the cedi depreciating, you can't predict. If you have prices going up, you can't predict. So that definitely has reduced the confidence that we have in our economy. And we need it. So we have to do everything possible to ensure that we stabilize the economy, bring the confidence back. And even foreign investors will now begin to bring in their monies. What we do as a chamber is to drive FDIs into the country as one of our activities. And it's difficult when you go there and you are telling somebody to bring his or her money into the country when they have read about the difficulties that we are going through. So it's not in the interest of us as businesses, and also in the interest of Ghana to find ourselves in the situation like this. I think the monetary policy, Bank of Ghana, they have a role to play. The Ministry of Finance, which handles the fiscal policy, also have a role to play. If one side is playing its role and the other side is not, we will not have a positive impact on inflation, bringing inflation down. The monetary policy rate is going up, and that is the tool that is available to the Bank of Ghana. And I think that they have used it extensively. It's about time they put a halt to it. And all of us pushing that the fiscal policy also comes in to complement the monetary policy. Other than that, we will not be able to achieve the desired level of inflation that we're looking for.
And in all of these, policies matter a lot. And I'm happy that Nana Chiribedu hinted a bit on policies. Now, there's been concerns about how our policies are not well coordinated and not aligned actually with what is on the ground. So that, for instance, in the agri sector, we may have done a lot of investments, but at the end of the day, how do we transport the produce from the farm to those people who need? How do we even get the market? All of these, you mentioned transportation costs, even poor infrastructure, road infrastructure, all of this, accumulating to bring us this problem. What do you think? Do you think that our policies are going to, the correlation, what's the correlation between our policies and inflation rate?
Right. And I think I have always had a problem with our agricultural sector policy, especially where it pertains to infrastructure in agriculture. You will recall that in between 2018 and 2019, we were able to implement the flagship PFJ program. And in that year, we saw market increases in the production of staples like corn, millets, etc. Now, that PFJ year, I believe that is what we should be doing every single year. That should be our agricultural sector policy, which we are implementing every year. We need those kinds of increases in yields to support food production locally. Now, if there is more production, prices come down, and farmers do not suffer because they have more to sell. And in that instance, you can then make the case for implementing policies such as banning importation of, for example, rice. You can make policies for banning poultry products, because then corn would be cheap for poultry farmers to buy, and so poultry products will again be cheap to sell on the market. And so these are how these things work. And in terms of policy, I think there are two components. There's the endogenic part, which is related to increasing productivity, what goes into the production itself. And then there's the exogenic part. So after production takes place, all the things necessary in order to transport the food and produce to the table. So that's where we are talking about rural infrastructure like roads, and like services for poor people. Yeah, like access to credit so that people can buy more fertilizer, and then the other part takes place. And so once we are not planning all of these together and we are doing the planning in silos, you will find that we'll produce a lot of food, but there's no transportation system to transport it efficiently. And so you would have fixed one part, but because the other part is loose, all of this falls apart. So there is a need to stop planning in silos and actually do some planning holistically. But that requires some very significant investment, not just in research, but also in infrastructure for road networks, for irrigation, for development of even locally produced fertilizer, and also a host of other things. And then on the side of us as consumers as well, I think that there comes a time where we also have to respond to these things by changing some of our tastes and preferences, right? And that's going to be a very difficult band-aid to rip off, right? So for example, changing our tastes in rice from foreign long grain to what we produce locally. Subtle things like that. But that takes place over a longer period of time. But immediately, what needs to be done is the investment in infrastructure and investment in all the things that the PFJ did on an annual basis, right? I think it points to the fact there's a framework which African countries have adopted, which requires them to invest at least 10% of GDP in the agricultural sector. Now, this has been widely acclaimed, but very, very narrowly applied. So you will find that in our budget statements, we are not implementing this 10% of investments in agriculture. And this goes a long way to affect how the structure of the economy fundamentally is. Right. So all of these things have to be done holistically in terms of the planning against the endogenic factors which affect food and the exogenic factors which affect essentially getting it from the farm to our plates.
Okay. Dr. Sume, in terms of policy, what role does government subsidies play in actually increasing or lowering the inflation rate? I'm talking about, for instance, if government is subsidizing fuel for consumers, and if government is subsidizing fertilizer so that the farmer is not buying fertilizer 50% higher than the farmer used to buy, would we have had a lower inflation rate?
Okay, so I mean, we have to look at it more broadly. Clearly, the investment in particular, subsidizing the farm inputs were very important when the planting for food and jobs started. And then also, I think what we didn't do was, as Nana mentioned at some point, just look at the whole value chain, not just from what happens on the farm gate, but also from the farm gate all the way to the final market. So, investing in storage, investing in specialized transportation, and then, of course, the roads. But I think the issue about subsidizing petroleum is a little bit tricky because if you look at our current circumstances, we just not fiscally not in a position to subsidize fuel or anything like that. So I'm not sure that is something we should be encouraging.
Okay.
But I think not sustaining the initial gain from the planting for food and jobs was a problem. And in particular, it appears that we didn't look forward enough. So if we know that we are going to do this for several years, maybe you could have invested a lot more earlier on in terms of, use of more organic fertilizers and not become too dependent on imported fertilizer. So I think those are things that we really have opportunities to get involved, because now the fertilizers on the world market have become very expensive. So it's now time for us to look a little bit inward. So there's that angle. Then we generally have to look at how the economy is working. At the moment, it's difficult to see where things are looking on the up or things are being positive.
Okay.
So it's not just what's happening in terms of food production, but also just the general cost of living, general cost of production. So we are being hit by utilities, you are being hit by fuel, you are being hit by so many other factors. So, and then the currency is also adding on top. So we need broader policies. We just don't need to focus on one side and say if we fix this, all our problems will be solved, because the problems are multifaceted. There are many angles. There are issues with irrigation, there are issues with food processing, there are issues with road infrastructure, there are issues with transport. But you see, in the current environment, we have like one of the best opportunities we've had in a long time to make the long-term changes needed. When the COVID hit, it sort of gave us a natural protection that we could have used to build, some of our industries and also invest a lot more in domestic production.
Okay.
And we missed the opportunity because under COVID, everybody was closing their borders. Things were not moving around. So if we had started early and then invested early, we would have had the opportunity. But now, the current crisis, looking at how deep it is and how widespread it is, it also gives us the chance to say we are just going to make both medium and long-term changes that will ensure that going forward, we don't have the difficulties we are currently having.
Mr. Bidobaje, in terms of mitigating your losses, how would you want government to deal with it? We've spoken about Bank of Ghana trying to do more to ensure that some of these inflation rates, dollar and all of that are resolved or come down. But what do you want government to do to mitigate your losses?
Well, we are not in normal times. When COVID hit, we were not in normal times. So government thought it about that time, for instance, to reduce electricity, to reduce utility. All these things fit into the cost of production.
Okay.
I think they should have been thinking about some of these things. And so the cost of fuel, taxes on fuel alone, is about 16. And if you put all together with depreciation, definitely prices will go up.
And interestingly, the prices on the world market is actually going down, but we are not seeing the effects here.
We are not feeling the impact because of the depreciation of the cedi. And now a chunk of the inflation we have now is imported inflation.
Okay.
It means that those countries also have inflation and we are importing. But to go to the port and look at duties we are paying on imported products. Because of the depreciation, we are paying more. Okay. I know in other jurisdictions, goods that are of necessity to the people, like wheat, like food related, that are coming in, they have reduced duties on those goods. Okay. So that when they are coming, you don't pay a lot at the port. That will feed into imported inflation. I think they have to look at all these things. But this, as I said, is in the domain of the Ministry of Finance. It's a fiscal policy. Okay. So they have to complement that one with the monetary policy. If they do all these things, I think that it will cushion businesses, and when cost of production goes down, definitely prices will also go down. I personally think that it's time that we need to wake up. The managers of the economy is gradually losing it, and it's about time they sit up and ensure that they turn things around for the business community to also thrive.
So let me bring in Foster. Okay, so I'm told that we've lost Foster. Okay, so Dr. Sume, let me just finally ask you this. You're talking about the multifaceted issues that's making up this inflation that we're seeing. In terms of recommendation, what would you recommend that we do to actually reduce some of these figures we are seeing?
Okay, so there are some things that can help, in the shorter term, but I mean, we shouldn't think that there's a immediate term or short term solution to the problems we have. They've been many years in the making, and then they are hitting us from all angles. So one of the immediate things that will bring relief in terms of the inflation is if somehow we manage to stabilize the currency. It doesn't look like that is on the horizon for the rest of the year, because I mean we are not expecting that we are going to get any foreign cash flow to boost our reserves. So I don't think we'll get any immediate relief. But in some sense, it's also a blessing in disguise. So we don't go for short-term solutions, and then that will come to bite us in the long term. So I think what has to happen is something on the fiscal side. The budget is going to be read next month. Okay. So it's an opportunity for us to see how we are going to realign our expenditures to boost. Even though we are in difficult times, we still need to make key investments in some important areas, so that when we get out of this and we get some macroeconomic stability, we are going to see growth. So, for instance, we need to realign our expenditure priorities. It's difficult to say government should raise the expenditures, but there's been a lot of discussion about how much we spend on the overall governance in terms of, and then how much we get back from it, versus what goes into supporting the productive sectors, in particular agriculture and then industry. So I think we need to do some realignment on the fiscal side, and then also make more long-term commitment that we are going to reduce our dependence on both foreign goods and services, as well as foreign financing. So when we do that, it's over the long term, it's going to help us reduce the way external shocks tend to hit the Ghanaian economy. So, there are several things that we have to do at different levels to help on that.
And I'm happy that you say that the government has the opportunity to actually add this to the budget upcoming that we are expecting. I want to say thank you to you, Mr. Magbedu Abuaji, he's CEO of Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much, Dr. Patrick Esuming, John Foster Jaho, and Anochri Bedu. I'm grateful that you joined us. My name is Ayisha Ibrahim. Enjoy the rest of our programs.